Welcome to Lesson 1, Video 2. We're going to start off with some neuron terminology. In our last video, we talked about all of the different structures of a neuron, and we talked about glial cells. Now we're going to get on to neuron terminology. So ganglia and nuclei are pretty much the same thing, but nuclei are going to be found in the CNS, and ganglia are going to be found in the PNS. And you're going to see this term much more than this term. You're going to see ganglia or ganglion when they're talking about clusters of neurons, a lot of times like in the limbs. So here's just an example. Up here you can see it talks about nuclei right there in the brain stem and up here. And really it just kind of means that it's a kind of small bundle of neurons. And then here you can see they use the term ganglia when it is in the PNS, not the CNS. So same thing, just different location. Okay, tracts and nerves. Once again, these are pretty much the same thing, but different locations. Tracts are basically nerves that are found in the CNS, and we're really talking about spinal tracts here. So up and down your spinal cord, you have tracts that basically act as a highway of information traveling up and down the CNS. And they can be either white or gray matter, and this is actually a huge concept right here, the difference between white and gray matter. When you look at white matter in the brain or the spinal cord, it's going to mean that it has myelin surrounding it. And if it's gray, that's going to mean that it's unmyelinated. So like I said, that's actually a very important concept to understand, and we get definitely more into it when we start talking about the spinal cord and brain in particular. And also you're going to do an assignment where you look at the difference in transmission rate between white and gray matter. And nerves are the bundles of nerve fibers that travel through the PNS, and that's probably a term you're very familiar with. For example, you have your brachial nerve or your femoral nerve. Those are large nerves found in your limbs. This is a picture just showing you what I mean by spinal tracts. So when you look at, this is actually a cross section of your spinal cord, and it shows you that we have different tracts, and if they're blue, that means the information is going up. And if it's red, it means that the information is going down. And you can see there's different tracks and they're all named pretty much for kind of where they're located and where they're going. When you get into your higher anatomy classes in college, you actually have to learn all of these. And it can become really challenging, but it's also really interesting to just see how it all kind of works. Okay, next we're going to talk about neuron classification. And really, neuron classification is first by function and then by structure. Sensory or afferent neurons are always going to start in the peripheral nervous system. That's really important. And this makes sense because sensory is like a sensation. So touch, smell, taste, vision, hearing, those are all senses. So right now, you're sensing a whole bunch of different things. If you're even touching a pencil right now, filling in your note guide, that's a sensation. That's a touch sensation. So what it's doing is those neurons are sending information towards the central nervous system, towards your brain and spinal cord. And that's just allowing your central nervous system to know what's going on. So as you're even staring at the screen right now and listening to me, you have vision neurons and hearing neurons that are basically interpreting that information and sending it to the central nervous system to be analyzed. Kind of what we talked about a little bit earlier was these sensory neurons are going to have special receptors that are basically going to be taking in information, especially in those organs like the eyes and the ear. Okay, anytime you have a sensation, we have these receptors that are bringing that information to the brain and the spinal cord. And then this is a really cool concept here. If you're going into physical therapy or athletic training or occupational therapy, you're going to hear this word a lot, proprioception. And these are going to be found in the muscles and tendons. And if you were to close your eyes right now, just go ahead and close your eyes. Your eyes are closed. you can still tell where your foot is. You may not be able to see your foot, but you know where your foot is. That's because you have proprioceptors in the muscles and tendons in your foot that are allowing the central nervous system to be keeping track of your foot even though you can't see it. And the reason I say you're going to see it a lot in physical therapy and athletic training is when you get injured, sometimes these proprioceptors are also injured, and that's when you have to work on like balancing with your eyes open, with your eyes shut, to help get athletes back to being able to tell where their body is in space. So this is just showing you, here's like example would be a pain receptor here. So that's going to be a sensory neuron. It signals that, oh my gosh, we just touched this hot object, and it's going to send that information to the spinal cord, which is part of the central nervous system. All right, then you have your efferent or motor neurons. These are always going to start in the central nervous system, and they're going to carry information from the central nervous system to muscles and glands. And then the last type is interneurons. These connect the sensory and motor neurons together, so they're always going to be located in the CNS. So if we look here, this goes through all three of those neurons we just talked about. The green is representing that sensory or afferent neuron. It's taking information to the central nervous system. The red is your interneuron. See how it's connecting that sensory and motor neuron together. And then the motor neuron takes information from the central nervous system and sends it to a muscle or gland. So when we look at this reflex right here, we touch this hot object, this candle, we send that pain information to the central nervous system. The central nervous system analyzes it, and then we activate our bicep muscle down here to pull your hand away from the candle. Okay, and then we have our structural classification. This is based on basically the processes that are extending from the cell body. The most common type of neuron, and the one that we've been looking at, is called a multipolar neuron, and these are going to be your motor neurons. And basically they're going to have your axons and dendrites extending from the cell body. Okay, so here's our multipolar neuron. We've looked at this many times. Here's the dendrites. Here's our cell body where our nucleus and all our organelles are. And then here's the axon and our axon terminals that are going to transmit it to the next neuron. So that's our most common type. We also have bipolar and unipolar neurons. We don't really talk about the bipolar ones. They're very unique, and they're really only found in the eye and the nose. But our unipolar neurons are important because these are our sensory neurons. And really, they kind of just have this really, really long kind of axon that can actually take impulses and go both directions to pass it along. So if we look here, here's what our sensory neurons look like. These are our unipolar neurons. So you can see here that they have dendrites over here, but they're kind of short. And then we have this super long axon, and the information can actually just pass right through the cell body. Remember, on our multipolar, we had all the dendrites attached to the cell body. That's not the case here. The information is sent so quickly that it just kind of passes over the cell body to the axon. All right, next we're going to get into a pretty complicated topic. So I really want to make sure that you're focused right now. And we're going to be talking about neuron physiology. And neuron physiology is complicated, but it's actually super cool how information is passed throughout our body just using ions. It all is an electrical charge. Okay, your nervous system is kind of fueled by this electricity. And when we say that a neuron is at rest or not doing anything, it is polarized. Very important term to know here. Polarized. So when a neuron is at rest, it is polarized. And that means that the inside of the neuron is more negative. So let's look at this picture over here quickly. Okay, this is our resting neuron. Negative 70 millivolts is actually a resting neuron charge. And if you look on the inside, you're going to see that it is more negative than it is positive. Positive is going to be the outside charge. Negative is going to be the inside charge. So inside of that axon right there, it is negatively charged compared to the outside. And the two major ions we are talking about is going to be sodium and potassium. Sodium being the Na+, potassium being the K+. So right now, when we are at rest, there is more potassium ions inside and then more sodium ions outside. And there's many more sodium ions outside than there are potassium inside, giving it an overall negative charge. So neurons become excited when they are stimulated. Just even looking at this video right now, you're stimulating a whole bunch of different receptors in your eyes and in your ears that are going to basically activate those neurons to send a message to your central nervous system. And we do this by using sodium and potassium and also neurotransmitters. So neurotransmitters are chemical messengers that are going to be able to pass one message from one neuron to the next neuron. So we're going to go ahead and pause here just so we have enough time to really get into the nitty-gritty on a physiological level, what happens with neuron physiology. We're going to continue this in our third video.